Welcome back. All right, so we're going to do a panic index today. And I think it's a good time because it's after the first round, right? So I've separated into two lists. I've got the 8 teams that missed the first or lost in the first round and the 16 teams that missed the playoffs. I'm going to rank them this way. This will be the last panic index until probably after free agency. I don't think anything's going to change much until after free agency. And for the teams, the 8 teams that are still in the playoffs, I don't think there's any reason to rank them in terms of panic after the second round because if you make it to the second round, you're a contender. You are a team that's, top 8 in the NHL out of 32 teams. I don't think panic should be part of the storyline. But what I've done is I've got the panic face at the top. Normally that's at the bottom, of course. Normally it's the happy teams that are at the top. In this case, the happier teams will be the ones that are at the bottom. I've got the Atlanta Thrashers magnet underneath the bottom team that missed the playoffs because the Thrashers should be imminently happy. They haven't lost a game in over a decade. I might have used this as an excuse to use my Atlanta Thrashers magnet. No regrets. All right, so we're going to start with the teams that missed the playoffs. We're going to start at number 16. And again, this is not as fast as the power rankings, nor is this precise or all of that. So you guys can let me know your thoughts about which team should be the most panicked. I've got Arizona as the least panicked in the National Hockey League because the teardown was expected. The team was supposed to be bad, and they were. So they basically did exactly what was expected of them. I also don't see the ASU issue as a reason to panic because this is some stability. It doesn't matter. They could be playing in a parking lot, really. As long as they've got a lease, they're not going anywhere. So they've got a lease for the next 3 years and the option for a fourth. So that will settle down. The actual real idea that maybe Arizona could end up moving is gone. The speculation will never stop. If you're a Coyotes fan, I apologize. The speculation will never stop. It's been over a quarter of a century. It'll never go away. So, that being said, I don't think there's any reason to panic with the team. Now they got some more draft picks. They got all kinds of prospects coming in. We'll see how it works out for them. At 15, I have Buffalo. So this is interesting because I've got the two teams at the bottom of the list that nothing was expected of them coming into this season. But that's not why they're here. Might be why Arizona's there. Buffalo's here because they started getting better. I think if Buffalo had been bad all year and if everything was just kind of a mess, I don't think that I would have Buffalo at 15th on this board. We'd have a lot more to discuss about Buffalo spinning their wheels. But it feels like things got better. That the Eichel trade made things a little bit better. So yeah, that's where I have Buffalo. 14, Anaheim. Still in a rebuild. Pat Verbeek making it clear at the deadline when he traded off some pretty big pieces off that roster. And yeah, they're starting to pick up draft picks, prospects, and here we go. This is a team that already has Trevor Zegras. This is a team that already has John Gibson, who's in his prime, in net. You have Drysdale on the blue line. He looks like a keeper. There's a lot of reasons to look at this team, and of course, you got Terry, you've got Steele still. Sam Steele still has that potential. But you've got Terry reaching a career high, and he may be able to break that record next year as well. So for the Ducks, even though they lose Getzlaff, and it's a shame, that his career is done, but for the Ducks, they seem to be pointed in the right direction. So I don't see any reason to have them higher up on the panic index. Number 13, this is where it gets tough. So Vancouver, based on and I say this as a Canuck fan, it feels like we're always one moment away from throwing our hands in the air and going, man, I knew it. I knew not to get my hopes up. That just feels like that's the life of a Canuck fan, where things are going well. Look at a couple weeks ago, things are going well, and then word came out that Bruce Boudreau might not be back, and immediately it was, I can't believe this. They're not. How can they not have? And now it's come out that he's come back. So he's going to return to being behind their bench next season. And right away, fans are like, oh, good. Not all. There are some that will say, well, I don't know that that's going to work because that's the contrarian nature of sports fans. Notice I didn't say Canuck fans because sports fans will do that in general. Sometimes it's genuine, and sometimes I think it's just to be contrarian. So Vancouver depends on the day, but I don't see any reason for panic. There's a lot of good players here. I think they're going to do relatively well next year. I have my hopes up for next year. Yes, I know that's a silly thing to do as a Canuck fan, but I chose to be a Canuck fan. Number 12, Seattle. So Seattle, they may not have achieved the goals that some people set out for them before the season started. I don't know if those were goals that were shared by the team itself, though, or by management, by ownership, by anybody. But Seattle, there are some concerns there. Not a lot. Obviously, I'm not going to have Seattle in this area. They've got the number 4 draft pick. Matty Beniers came in, looked pretty darn good. And so it's about filling out the roster. It's about figuring out what to do with that cap space that they have and to figure out whether the problem is the goaltending or the defense and just make it work from there. Number 11, Detroit. The Detroit Red Wings, honestly, I think are progressing pretty nicely. That being said, I do see some comments here and there regarding Detroit and the rebuild. I don't know how much of it's Detroit fans though, because again, I've watched as Yzerman's plugged a lot of holes in this roster, and when he came in, there were a lot. So this is the first year coming up, I think, where we're going to expect some real big improvement from the Detroit Red Wings. So we'll see if we get there this year. Right. So number 10. I debated about where to put him. I've decided 10's a good spot for Chicago. For the Chicago Blackhawks, obviously this year didn't work out the way that they had hoped. But by the end of the year, they clearly had embraced the idea that it's not going to just turn around overnight. The one thing that makes them, I think, a little more panicky than others might be, so if you decide you're going to go in this rebuild, retool, go through this. Who do you keep? Who do you lose of the veterans? What's the plan going forward? How many draft picks you're going to be able to pick up? And then the question of who's going to be behind the bench to start the season next year. There are a lot of unknowns with Chicago right now, so I think, again, it's a reasonable spot for them at 10. Number 9, Ottawa. It feels like Ottawa didn't take that step this year, but by the end of the year, it looked like maybe Tim Stützle was going to be that star player. Of course, Tim Stützle just got hurt at the Worlds, so that's not optimal. And that leans into the idea that not all owners and GMs are necessarily excited when players go over and play at the World Championships. But hey, we'll see what happens with Stützle next year and whether or not they can stay healthy and is the goaltending going to be good enough to get them into the hunt. But again, I don't see any reason. I think next year, if Ottawa doesn't show any progression at all, then if I do a power ranking at this time next year, they'll probably be a lot higher. Number 8, I thought it was a good spot for Montreal. Different points of the year, Montreal very panicked. I think at this point, the reality's just set in. This is where the team's at. This is what's going to happen. And yeah, Shane Wright winning the draft lottery definitely helps. If they hadn't won the draft lottery, if they'd end up 3rd, maybe at that point there would be some concern. But yeah, Montreal wins the draft lottery. A draft lottery that I was assured was going to be rigged, and then 3 or 4 different teams were attached to. If it's rigged, these teams win it. Montreal won it, and I haven't heard anything about that. So the league not favoring Montreal, but they get the number 1 pick for the first time since Doug Wickenheiser. Second time since Guy Lafleur, I do believe. Third time since Michel Plasse, I want to say was the other one. But yeah, so Montreal, Guy Lafleur did pretty well. Doug Wickenheiser was a bit of a miss. But we'll see how Shane Wright does for them, because in all likelihood, that's who they're drafting. Number 7, I debated about where to put them too. So I'm going to say this, New Jersey, I really think if Lindy Ruff had been replaced behind the bench by now, I probably would have had New Jersey down around here. But the fact that they've gotten rid of some of the coaching staff, Lindy Ruff's still technically there. I would not be surprised to see him replaced before the season starts, but I think that prevents New Jersey from being in the second column, because there is definitely some panic about, well, if Lindy Ruff's still behind the bench, can anything get better? The good news is for New Jersey, they're going to get a really good draft pick this year. So that's why I was debating about where to put them, because just from a draft lottery standpoint, they did it again. And so, New Jersey, at what point do they get told that they're one of the favored teams and all that? Anyways, New Jersey, number 7. Again, I think if they change the coach, that would probably help the fandom in general, but I don't know if they're going to or not. Number 6, Columbus. And again, with Columbus, I went back and forth, like, okay, so is there real panic with Columbus? Maybe. Not really, because they weren't expected to make the playoffs, but can they sign Line A long-term? Can they convince this team to all stay together? There are some question marks, so I have them at 6. I don't have them higher or lower. Number 5, San Jose. Because the team still is saying words that make it sound like they're going to gun for the playoffs next year, with a team that it does feel like needs to actually embrace a rebuild. A question was asked too of, well, if a team keeps missing the playoffs every year, aren't they in a rebuild anyways? The answer is no. The rebuild is a matter of how they're approaching trades. So are they picking up draft picks? Are they picking up prospects? If the answers are no to those questions, they're not rebuilding. They're picking up players likely, in of playing age, 23 and up. They're picking up guys they feel like can help them win now, and it's a big difference in the way that you approach things, and it does mean that you can be stuck in this mediocre hell where you're not good enough to make the playoffs, but you're not bad enough to get the kind of players that Montreal's going to get this year. And Montreal's not in a rebuild either. This was just sort of a thing that happened. But Arizona with their rebuild, Buffalo, Anaheim, now embracing that rebuild, you can pick up some really good players. So San Jose definitely could use some really top prospects. They need that, and we'll see if they start to get that this year. But again, they have not embraced the rebuild. So number 4, Islanders. And what definitely doesn't help the Islanders in this regard, I think that there's some concern about the way the team's put together. I've talked about how I think they need to get a bit younger, but the firing of Barry Trotz is why I have them at number 4. I'd have them much lower if not for the firing of Barry Trotz. Promoting Lane Lambert, I think, helps to settle down some fans who might have been upset with the move, but there's still a lot of concern about which direction the team's going and whether or not Lou Lamoriello's touch is starting to falter a little bit with this team, right? So we'll see what happens this coming season, but yeah, I have them at 4. At number 3, Philly. I have Philly at 3. I would have had them at number 1 for a lot of the season late, but right now I have them at 3. I mean, they didn't win the draft lottery, so they're not getting Shane Wright. But at the same time, for Philadelphia, it feels like this has to have been bottom. At the same time, who's going to be behind the bench as the coach? What's the plan going forward? Who are they going to keep? What is going to be the goaltending situation? I mean, Carter Hart's the starter. They bring back Jones. What do they do? And how do you get back into the hunt in the Metro, right? A lot of questions with Philadelphia at this point. Number 2, going with Winnipeg, because the Winnipeg Jets should be better than what they are, should have finished higher than what they did. And at some point in time, we look at teams that should be higher, could be higher, and we just say, yeah, this team always underachieves. Winnipeg's flirting with that little mark in our books of this is a team that's going to underachieve. We're going to look at them on paper and say this is a good team, but it's Winnipeg, so that's an issue, right? So for the Winnipeg Jets, the Scheifele, whether or not Scheifele wants out, it's really exposed that idea of, okay, so does he want out? Is there a rift in the locker room? Is Scheifele on one side and somebody else is on the other? So with the Winnipeg Jets, I think whether there is or isn't a separation between one side and the other side on the team, it's still going to be out there as a storyline. So we'll see what they do this summer. Cheveldayoff sticking around. I know there were some fans that wanted to see Cheveldayoff gone. And so for those fans, probably not happy, probably more towards the panic side of things. If you have a GM that you don't feel like has fixed the problems with the team and he's sticking around, do you trust him to fix the problems now if he didn't address them and fix them properly before? And so number 1 in the non-playoff teams has to be Vegas. I don't even know if I need to explain this. It has to be Vegas. Whether it's right or wrong, Vegas at this point, it feels like they could bounce back next year and be number 1 in that division. They could absolutely end up being number 1 in the division and or they could miss the playoffs next year. This team could go either way. And if they were to miss the playoffs for a second year in a row, I don't know. So, yeah, Vegas, I think there's definitely some reason to panic. And again, this is a team that's been moving future assets, whether it's draft picks, prospects. They've been willing to move those guys out for guys who can play now. But if those guys who play now are, getting injured, and if they're having troubles, that's where the panic sets in. So, the panic for the teams that that made the playoffs and lost in the first round. At number 8, LA. No panic in LA. A lot of good young players up front on the blue line. They've got Peterson and Quick in net again for next year. And honestly, this is a team that, there really isn't any reason to panic with the LA Kings. This is a team that seems to be headed in the right direction. I think they're going to have no problem attracting free agents. And they did pretty well against Edmonton without Drew Doughty. So it says a lot about how far this team has come, that even without Doughty, they not only made the playoffs, but they took the Oilers to 7 games. So, yeah, I think LA's in pretty good shape. Number 7, this is going to be a reason for some debate. So for Nashville, getting swept in the first round leaves a bad taste in your mouth, right? But they were without UC Saros. This is a team that has been in the playoffs for quite some time now. There might be some belief that, if they're going to win a cup, the time's sort of running short. But again, I don't really go into the whole, has the window closed? Has the door opened for this team? I don't know why we're so obsessed with doors and windows. It's a sport where guys smash each other into the glass. Hopefully if the door's not open, you can just jump over the boards. Anyways, so for the Nashville Predators, I don't see any reason to necessarily panic. I know there's some fans who might be upset with how things turned out, but they shouldn't have really been that surprised because Colorado's been a machine all year, and Nashville was just that first team that was in their way. Darryl Sutter warned everybody. The team that played Colorado in the first round get 8 days, and he was right. It was 8 days, and it's all done. Number 6, Dallas. So Dallas, I'm torn, and again, this is as a Dallas fan. The Dallas Stars have a really good young core. They have some good young players. That new kid, Joe Pavelski, he's playing like a young kid, and so Pavelski's coming back, no problem. But the contracts for Ben and Sagan aren't aging particularly well, and it's a lot of cap space between those two guys. And I wonder if that's going to limit what Jim Nill's able to do in the offseason. Those are contracts Nill signed. So, again, for Dallas, I've definitely seen fans of the Dallas Stars that would like to have seen Rick Bowness replaced behind the bench. It's not going to happen now. Dallas makes the playoffs. They get to Game 7 against Calgary. Jake Ottinger came into his own, so any panic about goaltending, gone. And so Ottinger, it's his net next year. Hopefully they don't overplay him. Otter's a really good goaltender, but hopefully he doesn't play 65-plus games next year. I'll be curious to see what their goaltending situation is. Do you stick with Holtby? Do you look in another direction if you don't feel like Holtby's reliable? We'll see what ends up happening there. Number 5. I debated about Minnesota too. Because Minnesota, the one thing with Minnesota, of course, is you have the Timberwolves, you have the Vikings, you have the Twins, and you have the Wild. They don't win championships. And it's just, that's how it is. The Timberwolves this year got everybody's hopes up and then dashed them. And the Wild, then they did it after. So it's kind of cruel to fans of Minnesota. So I can't put Minnesota at the bottom, even though you've got Kaprizov. You've got a good team there. But another first-round loss, it just makes you wonder, like, yes, you've got Kaprizov, you've got that dynamic line that he's on, but do you have enough outside of that to really threaten to win a Stanley Cup? Is the goaltending good enough? I thought when they went out and picked up Fleury, it signaled that they knew they needed to make a change in net. To me, it showed kind of a lack of faith in Talbot as well, which, again, it's tricky with goaltenders, but do they have the goaltending going forward to win a Stanley Cup? And I think that's a valid question for any team that's in the playoffs. I think with LA, I think they showed with Jonathan Quick, he can still do it. Nashville, we didn't see with UC Saros. I mentioned Ottinger, he was a wall. And with Minnesota, there were times in that series against St. Louis that I wasn't sure. Although I will say this, goals saved above expected. Fleury had a good first round by that advanced metric. So we'll see whether or not they keep him around. Number 4. Boston. Boston, really, the big question mark is going to be Bergeron. I can't see Bergeron playing anywhere else. I would be floored to see Bergeron in another jersey. I don't think it happens, but the fact that they asked him right after the game, and that I don't think that's cool either. But the fact they asked him and he didn't give a definitive answer of, I would only play in Boston, I don't want to be anywhere else. I mean, it's nerve-wracking, right? And obviously Bergeron's not getting any younger. Marchand now in his early 30s as well. This is a team that I have said for a while now, I think they need to do some kind of a retool. And whether they do that, whether Bergeron walking away might force their hand there because they do not have depth down the middle to compete with top teams in the East. And without Bergeron, that makes that problem so much worse. So there's reason to be panicked if you're a Boston fan. If Bergeron sticks around, it'll allay that a bit. But I still do worry about this team getting older, not having enough depth, and it's a very similar story. But much like my other teams, I mean, Vancouver's got Demko, Dallas has Ottinger, and Boston's got Swayman. So every team that I cheer for has a pretty good young goaltender, which is kind of fun. I don't mind that at all. Number 3, Pittsburgh. So there's only so many go-arounds you get to win a Stanley Cup. And even though Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, and all these guys are really, really good players, well, is Malkin coming back next year? What's his cap hit going to be? Letang coming back next year, what's his cap hit going to look like? And how much term do you give these guys? So while it just looks like fait accompli, like Bergeron for the Bruins, that they'll stick around, they're not going anywhere. We don't know. Until they sign that contract, we just don't know. When Chara left the Boston Bruins and played in Washington, it didn't look right, but it happened. And so at some point in time, we do see veteran players move on and end up somewhere else when it's really not expected. So for Pittsburgh, was this their last chance? It's possible. I don't rule out teams with Sidney Crosby on them, but it is possible this was their last really good chance. Number 2 on the panic index of teams that lost in the first round, Capitals. For the Capitals, it's a very similar story to Pittsburgh. It's interesting to me how these teams are tied to each other throughout the last, I'll say, 30 years. They're both bad, they're both good, they both get franchise players. They're similar, and they both win Stanley Cups, right? Pittsburgh, more Stanley Cups than Washington. I have to say that, or else Pittsburgh fans, But anyways, kidding. So for the Capitals, that cup in 2018, it looks like that might be the one. And I know that going into the 2018-2019 season, Ovechkin said all the things about, back-to-back not sucking years and all this. But at this stage, I don't know that Washington is likely to stay in the hunt next year, because there's going to be a team, at least one or two teams in the East that get better and push their way into the playoff conversation. Washington is the number 2 wild card, and again, with the age of a lot of the players on the team, they would seem to be the team that logically falls off. But Pittsburgh, we're reaching a point too where logically they will fall off. So these teams might get tied to one another, and who knows, maybe one or the other or both could be in the running for Connor Bedard next year, which would definitely reverse the panic side of things. And number 1 kind of has to be Toronto. It happened again, right? So it kind of has to be Toronto because it happened again. They're in the first round. It looks like they're going to win, and then they don't. And, it's we can have that debate. I've talked about them in a couple of videos already, but at this stage, the Toronto Maple Leafs, I don't know. I don't know if they're going to be a contender or not next season. Moves have to be made. And when you make those moves, you can get closer to a cup. You can get further away. And so I expect some moves from Toronto. I expect some moves to get them into a better spot with the cap. Maybe help them improve their depth that way. But yeah, I totally get the panic when it comes to Toronto, because you only get a certain number of years. And then it's done. And then that era is finished. There's going to be a video at some point this summer. I've tried a couple of times, hopefully now in the new set and with the ability to have more room to really plot out the madness boards. I want to do one on eras that teams have had where they're really successful, but it hasn't translated to the postseason. And when that happens, those are teams that we end up remembering going, yeah, they were good for a while, right? But we don't think, oh, they were awesome. We just remember they did well in the regular season, but because they never had the postseason success, it's an era that's remembered as being pretty good, not great. The Stanley Cups will always make it look like, hey, that team was awesome, weren't they? Yeah, they won the Stanley Cups. So we'll see what happens. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And again, this is just my ranking. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. And if you're a fan of one of these teams, are you more panicked or less panicked than what I got on the board? Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.